You ever see a moment happen and just feel it turn, like something in the air shifts before anyone even says a word? Yeah, that's how this started: quiet, normal, nothing special, and then out of nowhere it became something you couldn't ignore, something that sticks with you longer than it should. It was just me and my son at a park that afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just trying to enjoy a little time together, you know what I mean? The kind of day where you're not thinking about anything heavy, just watching your kid laugh and run around like the world is still simple. Caleb was 7 at the time, full of energy, bouncing from the swings to the monkey bars like he had somewhere important to be every 5 seconds, and I was just sitting there on a bench, leaning back, letting myself breathe for once. No meetings, no calls, no pressure, just being his dad. That was it. That was enough. And for a while, everything felt exactly the way it should. Kids, laughing parents, half paying attention, the usual weekend noise that somehow feels peaceful when it's your own kid out there. Then I noticed the cruiser. At first, I didn't think much of it. Police show up at parks sometimes, it's not unusual, but something about the way it stopped, not passing through, not casual. It parked, and the officer inside just sat there for a second watching. You learn to notice that kind of thing whether you want to or not. I told myself, don't assume, just sit, just wait. But then the door opened, and he stepped out, and the way he walked toward us, yeah, it wasn't random. Straight line, no hesitation, like he already decided something before he even said a word. He stopped in front of me and went, "You the kid's father?" No hello. No introduction, just straight to it. I looked up and said, "Yeah." He asked how long we'd been there. I told him maybe 20 minutes. Nothing exact, just a guess. He nodded like he was checking off a box and then said, "I got a complaint." And right there something felt off about what I asked. He pointed toward the playground, toward my son, about him. I remember turning and looking at Caleb, and he was just laughing, chasing another kid, taking turns on the slide, nothing loud, nothing out of line. Just being a kid. So I said it simple, calm. He's just playing. And this officer, he sighed like he'd heard that before, like he already didn't believe me, and he goes, "That's what the complaint says too." That's when I sat up a little straighter. "I'm sorry. What does that even mean?" He says families said Caleb had been lingering too long, making people uncomfortable. I remember thinking, this is a playground. That's what kids do here. But the way he said it, the tone, this isn't really a place for him to linger like that. And there it was, subtle, but not really subtle if you've lived long enough to recognize it. I stood up slow, not aggressive, just trying to understand. Why exactly would we leave? He shrugged, like it wasn't even a big deal, like it was obvious there are other places you people can go. And then, almost under his breath, but loud enough, maybe Popeyes. And yeah, that happened. For a second, I didn't even respond because your brain kind of pauses when something like that hits you out of nowhere. Then it clicked, and I felt it in my chest, that mix of disbelief and anger that you try to keep under control because your kid is right there watching you. I said, "You just said Popeyes." He crossed his arms. "Don't twist my words." I told him I wasn't twisting anything. He brought it up. He said it was just a suggestion. I told him no, it was a stereotype. And right in the middle of that, Caleb ran over, smiling at first. "Dad, did you see?" And then he stopped when he saw the officer. That smile dropped quick. Kids feel tension faster than adults sometimes. The officer looked down at him and started asking him questions like he was investigating something. "How long you been here? You bothering people? Making other kids uncomfortable?" Caleb shook his head, confused voice, getting smaller with every answer. "No, sir. I'm just playing." Then he looked at me and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" And I swear, that question hits harder than anything that officer said. I knelt down and told him, "No, buddy, you didn't do anything wrong." But the officer kept talking like it didn't matter what I said, like the story was already written in his head. Caleb's eyes started watering and he said, "I just wanted to play." And that was it for me. Not yelling, not losing control, just something inside tightening, because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about him, about a 7-year-old being made to feel like he didn't belong somewhere he absolutely had every right to be. The officer says this park is for families. I stood back up and said, "We are a family." He shook his head and said, "Not the kind people here are comfortable with." And now it wasn't subtle anymore. People around us started paying attention, phones came out, whispers started, and you could feel that shift in the crowd, like everyone realized this wasn't normal. I repeated it back to him. "My kind," and he didn't hesitate. "You heard me." Caleb grabbed my hand tighter and said, "Dad, I don't want to leave, I just want to play." His voice cracked and I felt that break again, deeper this time. I looked at him, then back at the officer and said, "No." "We're not leaving." The officer blinked like he wasn't expecting that and said it wasn't a suggestion. I told him I knew that and I was refusing it. That's when it escalated. His voice got louder. He said I was refusing a lawful order. I told him it wasn't lawful. He stepped closer, asked if I thought I was smarter than him, and I said no, I just know my rights. He laughed, said people like me always say that, and I told him people like him assume we don't have them. You could feel the crowd go quiet at that point. He called it in on his radio, said I was non-compliant, and Caleb asked me if I was going to get arrested. I told him no. But the truth is, in that moment, you never really know how far something like that can go. The officer leaned in and said, I was about to learn something, that when an officer tells me to leave, I leave. And I told him calm as I could, no, you're about to learn something. That's when I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and showed him my ID. My name is Marcus Reed, and I'm a state senator. And yeah, you could see it on his face, that flicker, that moment where reality hits, but pride doesn't let go yet. He tried to brush it off, said people fake IDs all the time. The crowd was murmuring now, some people laughing in disbelief, others just watching, recording everything. I told him to call it in if he didn't believe me. He didn't. Instead, I called. I stepped back, dialed, and said, "This is Senator Reed. I need a supervisor at Maplewood Park immediately. And you might want internal affairs listening too." The whole energy shifted right there. He stiffened, looked around at all the cameras, all the people, and suddenly he wasn't the only one in control of the situation anymore. I told him his supervisor was on the way, and he asked if I thought that scared him. I told him no. I thought accountability would. When the second cruiser pulled in, you could feel it before it even stopped. Different kind of presence. Sergeant Morales stepped out, took one look at the crowd, the cameras, my son holding on to me, and she already knew something wasn't right. She asked him what happened. He said he was handling a complaint. She looked around and said that was a lot of attention for a complaint. I stepped forward, introduced myself, showed my ID again, and her whole tone changed immediately. She asked him directly what happened. He tried to explain, but it didn't land the same anymore. I told her, he said my son didn't belong here. Someone in the crowd added the Popeyes comment. She looked at him and asked if he said that. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everything was already recorded. Within a day, the video was everywhere. Local news, national coverage, social media blowing up with clips of him saying your kind, clips of my son crying, asking why he couldn't play. 3 weeks later, he was terminated. 11 years on the force, gone. Months later, the city settled millions of dollars, policy changes, training, all of it. But none of that changes the moment the kid looks at you and asks if he did something wrong just for existing in a space he has every right to be in. A few weeks after everything, I took Caleb back to that same park. Same swing, same slide, same bench. He ran off like nothing ever happened, laughing again, climbing again, just being a kid. And I sat there watching him, same as before, but different this time, because once something like that happens, you don't unsee it, you don't unfeel it, you just carry it with you. So let me ask you this. If you were there that day, standing in that park, watching a child be told he didn't belong, would you have said something or would you have stayed quiet? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because moments like that don't just reveal one person, they reveal all of us.